Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a fascinating, deep dive philosophical journey into how our ancestors viewed reality. We moderns tend to take our perception of time completely for granted. Think about it. From the very moment we wake up, we're tracking literally every single second on our smartwatches, and we are just entirely obsessed with linear progress, always moving forward, right? But as we're about to explore, archaic man experienced the cosmos and the flow of time itself entirely differently from us. It is a completely alien yet profoundly beautiful way of understanding existence.
And this right here is the source text for our journey, Mircea Eliade's absolutely incredible work, Cosmos and History, The Myth of the Eternal Return. In it, Eliade presents a thesis that is genuinely mind-bending for a modern audience. He argues that traditional, pre-modern societies didn't just casually ignore history because, say, they lacked writing or records. No, they made a conscious, deliberate effort to completely disregard historical time altogether. In fact, Eliade notes that he almost subtitled this book Introduction to a Philosophy of History precisely because it analyzes societies that actively fought against the very concept of history as we know it. They basically wanted absolutely no part in a timeline that just relentlessly marched into the unknown.
Okay, let's dive into this. To unpack this dense metaphysical worldview, we're going to follow a four-part roadmap. Number 1, archaic versus modern man. 2, redefining the archetype. 3, how things become real. And finally, 4, the revolt against time.
Starting right off with Section 1, archaic versus modern men.
To really wrap our heads around this, we need to clearly contrast two completely different modes of existing. First, we have modern man. Heavily influenced by Judeo-Christianity, modern man insists that he is connected strictly with history. For him, time is a straight linear progression. It's like an arrow shot from the past, flying through the present, straight into the future, and it never, ever repeats. Archaic man, on the other hand, feels indissolubly connected not to history, but to the cosmos and its cyclical rhythms. Now, the cosmos does still have a history to him, but it's a sacred history, because it was created by gods or mythical heroes. And here is the absolutely crucial part. It's a history that can be periodically regenerated. For archaic man, time isn't a straight line, it's a circle. It's an endless loop of divine actions that can be repeated indefinitely, continually returning the world to its original perfect state.
That brings us to Section 2, redefining the archetype.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that before we go any further into how this cyclical worldview operates, Mircea Eliade himself makes a remarkably candid admission in his 1958 preface. He writes, "In using the term archetype, I neglected to specify that I was not referring to the archetypes described by Professor C.G. Jung. This was a regrettable error." I mean, it's incredibly rare to see a brilliant scholar basically apologize for using a word that inadvertently misled an entire generation of readers. So we definitely need to make sure we don't fall into that same vocabulary trap.
So let's get this totally straight. When we talk about an archetype in this explainer, it is absolutely not a psychological structure buried deep in the collective unconscious. That's the Jungian sense, and we're just going to discard that completely for this topic. Instead, an archetype here is an exemplary model or a paradigm of superhuman origin that was revealed at the very beginning of time. Think of it in the Augustinian sense. It's a transcendent divine blueprint or a perfect thought existing entirely outside of our physical everyday world. It is the ultimate divine original copy of an action or an object laid down by the gods long before human history even began.
All right, moving on to Section 3, how things become real.
So how does anything, a physical object, a piece of land, or even a human action, actually acquire value and become real in the archaic mind? Archaic man might not use technical philosophical words like being or illusory, but his myths tell us exactly how he views the world. In his eyes, nothing in the external world has any intrinsic value on its own. It's all just empty space or meaningless motion until it connects to the divine. Things only become real through three main avenues. First, through the imitation of those celestial archetypes we just talked about. Second, through participating in the symbolism of the center, which basically means anchoring themselves to a sacred focal point where the physical world connects directly to heaven. And third, through the repetition of the cosmogony. Now, the cosmogony is the creation of the universe. So to archaic man, whenever you build a new house or conquer a new territory, you aren't just doing some secular everyday task. You are ritually repeating the god's original act of transforming chaos into order. Reality is strictly a function of imitating these transcendent models.
And this brilliantly illustrates how it actually plays out in the physical world. Let's look at sacred stones. To archaic man, a normal rock sitting on the ground has absolutely no intrinsic value. It's just a crude, meaningless product of nature. But a thunderstone? That becomes absolutely saturated with being and magical power, because it's believed to have fallen directly from the sky, connecting it to the heavens. Pearls are intensely sacred because they emerge from the mysterious, chaotic depths of the sea. Bethels become sacred because they were the exact scene of a theophany, a divine appearance. Think of the stone that served as Jacob's bed in the biblical story, where he dreamed of a ladder reaching straight up to heaven. The rock itself isn't special. The physical object merely acts as a hollow vessel, a receptacle for an exterior transcendent force that suddenly fills it with absolute reality and ultimate meaning.
And this concept extends directly to human actions too, fundamentally changing how we understand daily life. Even our most basic biological behaviors aren't just physical automatisms to archaic man. Take nutrition, for example. It isn't just about consuming calories to survive. Eating is a ritualized act that renews a divine communion. Marriage and collective ceremonies aren't just social contracts or legal agreements. They acquire reality only by echoing mythical prototypes that were consecrated in illo tempore, which translates to in those days. That phrase refers to that sacred mythical time at the dawn of creation when the gods established exactly how things should be done. If a human act doesn't reproduce a primordial example, if someone just, makes something up for the first time without a divine model, it is considered profane. And to the archaic mind, the profane is downright terrifying because it's empty, it's chaotic, and it is completely devoid of reality.
So the crucial point is perfectly captured in this powerful quote from Eliade. He says, "His life is the ceaseless repetition of gestures initiated by others." Stop and really think about the weight of that statement for a second. In all the particulars of his conscious behavior, archaic man acknowledges no act which has not been previously posited and lived by someone else, some transcendent being or hero. Literally everything he does has been done before. He does not want to be an individual creating a unique, never-before-seen path. No way. To be real, his entire existence must be a faithful, precise replay of divine gestures.
This leads us into our final section, the revolt against time. We have officially reached the metaphysical climax of Eliade's thesis. Archaic ontology is a deliberate metaphysical revolt against concrete, historical time, and a profound nostalgia for a periodical return to the great time of the beginning. You see, this dismissal of history isn't just primitive conservatism, and it certainly isn't a lack of intelligence or imagination. By rejecting profane, continuous time, where events happen just once and vanish forever, archaic societies were actively trying to give human existence its ultimate meaning. They completely rejected the idea of historical man, who creates himself within a linear history. Why? Well, because of what Eliade calls the terror of history. Think about it. If a drought, a plague, or a war happens completely randomly in linear time, it is just meaningless, agonizing suffering. It's awful. But if that same suffering is seen as a repetition of a mythical event or part of a cosmic cycle that will eventually be wiped clean and regenerated through ritual, suddenly the suffering becomes bearable. It has a purpose. Rejecting linear history was actually a brilliant, necessary survival mechanism to preserve ultimate meaning in a very harsh world.
So, what does this all mean for us? What can we moderns actually learn from archaic man's revolt against history? In our modern world, we are so often crippled by anxiety, terrified by the relentless, unrepeatable march of time, and weighed down by the constant pressure to create our own individual meaning completely from scratch. Perhaps there is a profound grounding lesson hidden in our ancestors' worldview. Their deep desire to anchor themselves to the eternal, to find peace in the predictable, cyclical rhythms of the cosmos rather than the sheer chaos of linear history. It really forces us to pause. It challenges us to look closely at the underlying value and, frankly, the often exhausting nature of our own linear modern lives. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this fresh perspective keeps you curious.